Okay, so now I get to my guest. Now, that's not Ralph Langner.
Sorry. I'll put a Twitter poll and some shoes and pink shirts. We'll be good. Yeah.
So this is the first S4 that Ralph has missed, and we miss him, and I wish he could be here, but he usually tied it into a long vacation around this, and you might appreciate this, Rob. He's got a growing business that's trying to deliver new products, so he's a little busy these days. But he sends his regards, but I'm sure Rob will be an ample replacement. I've told him he has to give me a hard time like Ralph did. So I'm going to start this out, and of course this is Zach Tudor, who's been here every closing panel since we've been here. Zach, you all know Zach, though. So I'm going to start this out the way I do always, because we cover a lot of ground, but I'm always interested in what we're not talking about. So Zach, I'll start with you. What are we not talking about, this week at S4 that we need to be talking about?
Well, I think that one of the things that we really haven't talked about much is the government and what they do in kind of using this community that's been built. Some of you may have noticed that part of the government is shut down, and we really haven't been any diminished by their absence, which may be a bad thing. Thank you. So just in the tradition, right? Just want to go there. But you guys also know that I have deep affection for a lot of those agencies because I've been through a lot of them. But how they interact with the community, with the industries, how they provide some direction or cover in certain ways, and I think Rob and I were talking about this before, sometimes how they can send either consistent or mixed signals and how we can help them by our feedback. So having them be absent is really bad because they don't get to hear some of these things and see what's important to us and kind of take that back. And so I always like to kick off the year here at S4 by hearing those things and kind of realigning what we're going to do in our work based on a lot of those things.
Rob, what are we not talking about that we need to be talking about?
Yeah, I think there's a habit of trying to find solutions, tools, resources, whatever, that does a job. And sometimes we're not as good at holding ourselves accountable on, is it the most effective and efficient way to do our job? And it goes back to your discussion at the beginning and your keynote at the beginning of, these threats are getting worse. We know that. There's some FUD in the community, but they are getting worse. Our connectivity is increasing, the risk is increasing, and maybe we're not moving fast enough. And I think on one hand, we have to balance the need to say, maybe the regulations aren't where they should be. Maybe the standards aren't actually where they need to be. And on the other hand, we also need not to have so much infighting. I've made it a comment a couple times to people here, but one of my biggest concerns isn't that the ICS security competition of different vendors and whatever is bad. I think that the esoteric kind of risk is the IT security community or the board of directors of these companies look at ICS as an add-on and just go, well, we can just treat it the same. And if we are so focused on fighting each other that we don't do advocacy of our own community, I think the whole thing will pass us by.
Well, so I started out the event, and actually it's good that you're here because you were one of the initial speakers, so you're starting and closing this. I started out with this fear that we're falling behind. Even last year's keynote, I said I was optimistic, and I truly am in some sense, that because it seems like we're finally addressing the challenges, and we're not ducking them anymore. We're saying, yes, we need to do this. But I'm a little worried, even after the keynote and talking to so many people, I don't see the community actually talking about significant change. To me, I get the feeling of, we know what to do, work harder. We know what to do, be more persuasive. Do you have that same concern, or do you think maybe I'm just missing the boat?
No, I do, and I find myself often, and you've called me out on it too, of, hey, don't swing too far, where I come out fairly often and say, calm down. We've got this, DHS talks to a reporter and now phishing emails are taken down the grid. No, calm down, that's not how it works. But on the other side, there's a lot more risk than people realize, and there's a lot more activity going on than people realize. And I do sometimes see the counter where we'll have maybe 5 or 10% of the asset owners doing amazingly well. I mean, just absolutely dominating. And then we as a community almost want to take credit for it and be like, oh yeah, we're all doing well. Like, no, there's some of you that, gotta step it up a bit. And I think we've got to be careful of where we have those conversations and how. You talk to congressmen, it's going to be a different discussion than you have with your engineers, than with your board, than with the security folks. And I think finding that balance is just an incredibly difficult thing, but I would agree that we're not moving at the pace we should be. And I still think that most organizations are waiting for there to be a right answer. And they're going, well, let's watch what happens, and then we'll make a decision. And that's just not going to be in any way satisfactory to the problem.
That's a question of leadership, right? So someone has to step out first. But I think also, and you've had a much broader, look across industries, threats, vulnerabilities, everything for the last, 15 or more years. I think that we're at the point now where there are a lot more, say, known unknowns, right? People have their awakenings, different industries, different domains, communities. I think a lot of people, really understand that there's a huge problem, and like Rob said, a little bit daunted by the number of possible things that they need to do at once with limited manpower, with limited understanding. Sometimes with boards asking them, make sure you don't make the wrong decision. And so there's a lot of things that we have to try to swing at. And
yeah, we don't get a tech refresh. Like they're looking right now. Executives saying, okay, this is important, good job, community, what do you want to do? We can't pull that. We have to actually have the plan. This isn't a healthcare strategy, right? You actually have to have a plan to put forward when time's ready, because we need to do something, and we can't go back 3 years from now and be like, oh, we were wrong, let's try again.
Yeah. And for so many years, we'd say that people in the industry would say that all these conferences are just, sowing fear, uncertainty, and doubt, but all of a sudden infrastructures are getting attacked, around the world. And the people that were naysayers before are now scrambling to find resources, technologies, methodologies to go and do these things that, we've been really kind of, pushing nicely, cajoling for the last 15 years.
So I want to talk about attacks in a second, but before we leave this speed, you talked about the government not being here. And in theory, the government could play a major role in this. They're the ones with the big megaphone, right? They're the ones that people listen to, and you even have, the national labs supporting government. They are notoriously slow and cautious movers. Even just to throw you under the bus a little bit here,
I
since
you
you're
would
on stage, it's closing panel tradition. Usually, Ralph throws me under the bus, so I'll try to take.
We actually move very fast. We just can't tell you.
Okay. We talked a little bit about the CCE, which is, I think is a very interesting program from INL, but I've been hearing about it now for, I don't know, at least 9 months or so, and I still can't get a white paper on it. So, and I think INL moves faster than the government, so can we realistically count on them to do anything, or do we just have to assume we're going to have to, as a community, do it, and then they will eventually support us?
Well, there are a couple of people from INL in the audience right now that, I don't even have to say anything to them. They can just feel the look in my eye as I agree with you that we need to move a lot faster on CCE. Thank you, yeah. And Andy Bachman mentioned before about a lot of people like the idea. They say, because intuitively it makes sense. The consequences, really, are the one, variable that you can kind of pin down. And they want to do it themselves. And I think trying to do CCE yourself as an organization is like doing your own knee surgery. The quads that we talk about that are threat informed and some other things, you really don't know that. You mentioned a point about being able to just do, the first and the fourth phases, and I think that's kind of better than nothing. But the true value is when we do all this. So, but yeah, I have been pushing, cajoling. Someone's annual goals for this year involve some of the things that you mentioned there, and so we hope to move out faster. We're going to be working with partners, hopefully someone like Dragos, a few of the other companies out there, to start training them on the methodology and how to get some of those threat-informed resources. Someone like Dragos already has a lot of the capabilities to go out and be a partner and do this and provide that. And there are a lot of other companies as well.
I'm not going to go easier on the government in my next statement. You don't have to. I would say on the government comment, since you asked, that I think the idea that the government's going to swoop in and save everybody is utterly ridiculous, and the government knows that. But talking to my first point about what are we not talking about around how things are working or not working, I still see government representatives going to utilities and manufacturing clients and others going, well, we didn't tell you because you didn't have a clearance, and if you just had a clearance, we could tell you, and it's utter crap. And I think the way that we sell things is utter crap, and you ruin any good credit you have with folks where, hey, actually, we need you to have a clearance because if you want us to talk to your executives when the time comes, like, we need you to have this in place. Not, we're going to give you better data about something that we don't even control. And I attribute that not to malice. I think there's a huge role for government, but I think sometimes it's very difficult to see what you don't know for anybody, but especially in government, where you think you see all this view into what the community is doing or the challenges being addressed or the threats, and you're actually missing most of what's going on, to the point where the government loves to take credit for stuff that it didn't do, but it just doesn't know that it didn't do it. Like citations on classified documents suck. Like I think the DHS honestly thinks they found the electric intrusions because they keep telling Washington Post that, and they didn't. It was vendors that reported it to them, but they'll go out and take credit for it all day long to get somebody else to show up to a briefing, and we got to be careful on how we approach that.
Okay, well, let's twist it now. So I said, what aren't we talking about? So we were here for 3 or 4 days, depending on whether you went to the on-ramp or not. Rob, thank you for teaching the on-ramp. And by the way, the on-ramp this year, where we taught 78 people, the goal was to try to get them up to speed as fast as possible. That was launched basically in this session last year, where Ralph challenged us to grow the community even faster. We didn't quite reach his goal of like 10x in 2 years yet, but we're working on it. So what did you hear this week in terms of either sessions or just conversations in the hallway that you think is a trend in the right direction, where we're actually going down the right path? You have something?
So I really liked, and once again, I think you put together a marvelous set of programs, and always, whether it's in a panel of 2 people with opposing views or a session followed by a session that is totally the other idea. But I think that Mike Thompson's kind of the problem with the cube. Being able to look at things from multiple perspectives. So whether it's, do we need specialized talent? Do we need these other things? I think that we're starting to bring those multiple views together, and we realize here as a community that you just can't look at any of our problems in a single way, and that we have to have those multidisciplinary, looks at a lot of what we're doing if we're ever going to really either respond appropriately or prepare appropriately.
Yeah, I would say, it's always the truth, but a general observation is the amount of connectivity happening between participants, where they are sharing lessons learned in ways that I don't think we were 3 to 4 years ago between infrastructure sites. And I think that has to do with education. Things like on-ramp matter. We were talking about this ahead of time, where it's easy to pick on the government on certain things or each other, but God, there's a lot of good stuff happening. If you look at the INL class, like how many people have gone through that and gone up to Idaho and experienced control systems, and how many people are really investing in culture change. So I think the thing that I heard most this year that I liked was really that culture change of what's working for you and let me go tell it to others. The highlight talk for me was probably still Julian's on the Triton discussion. I don't think we've heard the end of that. I think it's another perspective to consider. I like Julian, but I think there's probably pieces missing of that story. And it doesn't actually matter about who's right or wrong or what went right or wrong in the personas. It's, all right, well, here's how this event happened for us. You know what? Communication really hurt. Communication was a struggle for us. Let's make sure that when we go through tabletop exercises and stuff, we really stress communication of how we're going to deal with that. And I thought that was a really good takeaway that is something I think everybody could use.
Good.
I think, it's funny when you talk about the tabletop exercise, we are starting to see some progress in those. What we used to see is people would have their annual incident response or business recovery exercise, and it would be recovering a server. If this server crashes, how fast can we recover it? Yeah. And then I think Ukraine, we saw Ukraine, at least in the electric sector, not in the U.S., we don't do the SIP thing, but outside they actually started to say, wait a minute, we have to plan for something bigger. So we're starting to see that, and I think that's a positive reaction. But go ahead, please.
I was going to say, actually, you raised an interesting point around outside. Probably one of the things we're not talking about enough is what are other communities outside of a predominantly US community doing? You've done well about pulling in like CPL, and there's obviously folks here from Germany and Norway and everywhere else. It's good representation, but maybe not as much as like actually, here's like the nuts and bolts of what we've been doing and learning. I think that we could do a lot better on that.
Well, so while we're talking about attacks, I mean, this year we actually kept on day one, because we kept having to squeeze in some attack that happened in December every year, I think, for the last 3 years. This year we actually kept a little hole open for an attack, and nothing happened.
Yeah.
Well,
I'm sorry, nothing public.
And I would say the community is getting desensitized, and that's a bad thing. We are getting like, oh, somebody broke in and was taking screenshots of HMIs and stealing off engineering documents. Like, that happens 2 or 3 times a year. Like, what? No, that's huge. Like, that is a bad thing. But we're waiting for, I want to see the ICS malware. Well, half the threats we're seeing have nothing to do with malicious software in those environments. And so there's been a ton of things happen this past year, but people also aren't sharing those lessons. It's only the ones that have to be made public because they're so obvious. And I think that's another risk for the community.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I think a lot of important things do happen, but if they're not like flashy and splashy, then someone trying to bring lessons learned from those seems we said before that if you don't have a nice logo like Heartbleed, then an attack really isn't important, and so we need more graphic artists in cyber. So that's kind of the bad spot. One of the things that also struck me, for those of you that hadn't been familiar with the DARPA Radix program, and I probably mentioned it last year, but when DARPA comes in and spends $100 million in our space, that's kind of a big thing. And when I spoke to one of the original program managers, he said, DARPA is not in this for the long haul. But we want to make a big splash. We want to try and have some really important lessons, and also a lot of important questions that the performers and those that are watching will carry on. And so, I'm glad you had that review of that today. I think that it's a very important program for us to kind of see where some parts of the government realize and are spending their money to try and help us get to the next level in our own research here.
But if we look at the attacks, it's interesting. And by the way, there were some great videos that didn't get cleared. Mm-hmm. So I think if you keep your eye on that, I don't know where they'll end up releasing those videos related to the Plum Island attack that Michael and Gary talked about. But we tried to get those cleared. I think the shutdown hurt us a little bit with getting all the approval people in place. But maybe next year. Okay. Anyways, I wanted to talk. When you were talking about those attacks. The ones we had in December, though, were noteworthy, the Ukraine and Triton, because they caused damage. It wasn't just people looking at HMIs. It was, I guess we don't really know in Triton whether they were actually pre-staging or intending to cause damage at that moment. It was almost more like the German steel mill, maybe, that they were prepping. But those are the ones that seem to get a lot of attention. And were either of you there for Robert Graham's talk?
Yeah.
So
he said random blackouts across the United States could happen easily.
Well, what did you think? So this I thought was an interesting talk. He was saying he's not so much worried about the Stuxnet kind of attack where an entity was going to attack another entity to cause a specific problem. He said our biggest worry now is an entity maybe pays another entity to cause havoc across this type of sector wherever they can find the weakest link. Is that realistic in your view?
I think it's completely realistic, and I think we have a Stuxnet-ism of the community of we're always looking for 4 0 days and all these magical things. Like we look for things that impress us more than things that work or just do what they're supposed to do for a mission objective. And I think what hinders us is we do have a really broken view of intel as well and impact. And we think things like, even in that talk, is like, well, threat feeds aren't intel. Like we are so behind the curve in the public community about what actually intel is. Yeah. And there's so many impactful attacks happening, and even non-safety related, process related stuff where, we've done response cases this year. We had major food and beverage or pharmaceutical companies where the intellectual property theft wasn't in the enterprise. It was intellectual property theft for the manufacturing and historians and that side of the plant. And that's not what's going to excite us about, let's protect human life, but like you're talking about massive impact to those companies. And I think again on the threat piece, this idea that there's just some nation state team sitting out there targeting you, and that's just the ecosystem is ridiculous. It's why I hate the topic of attribution so much. Well, that was Russia. Well, what do you mean it was Russia? Is it a Russian team that's directing or getting directed from Russian hierarchy? Is it a Russian team that had analysts that were in the private sector, or they shared code and alliances or vendors? And I think even as we look at these teams, we see a lot of hacker for hire type companies spinning up and getting tasked by foreign governments to do things. And as that proliferates and as there's a market, and you called it out in the interview with Rob, I'm worried about when cybercrime figures out a way to make money off of this, that's going to be bad. And I don't think we're far off from that.
Yeah, I was just going to ask you, how far off are we?
I'm not, the predictions and stay out of predictions and intel, but the trend that we're seeing is we're both finding more because we're looking more than ever before, and more stuff is happening. And as our infrastructure moves to be more homogeneous infrastructure, it's lowering the bar for adversaries to be able to do more scalable effects, which makes the economics flip. And so I don't think we're too many years off.
And it's one of the things, it's kind of the loss for the broader Intel community, but it's really good for the industry that guys like Rob and others have kind of given up the government side, but they brought all of their understanding of Intel, how it applies, how to make it actionable, and are able to look, across, things that are available everywhere and help the industry in here. But he's very right. A lot of these, capabilities exist. And I had been saying for a long time that, maybe I thought it was Bitcoin was going to make, all of the criminal, actors. As long as I can find a way to get my money out of this, I'm going to start doing all these things. And we're close.
And I'll go back and say that's actually what I think very kindly too on role of government as well. And it was actually one of our analysts, Joe Slowick, kind of tweeted out the other day about it, but saying some of the places to really learn this and get experience over a lot of infrastructure and a lot of threats and see a lot of things is your large kind of consultancies, but also really the government. And being able to have that type of experience is super impactful. And so sometimes government's role, if nothing else, is like this feeder school of people out that have a different perspective to add to the ones that are in the community already, and it's super useful.
Yeah.
So I have a lot of other topics I want to cover, but I want to give you guys a chance. Is there something else that you've heard here or that you just really wanted to talk about that you think the audience? If not, I'm happy to ask other questions. But if you've got a list there.
I was going to say, you can just go down the list of all the talks, and any one of those, when they open the curtain, we can sit back and spend the rest of the day or weeks talking about it. So no, you please go ahead.
So let's talk about this a little bit. Interesting, one of the most commented on-ramp sessions, so this is the beginners, was executive communication, Patrick Miller. And it seems to be the thing that not only newcomers, but other people are worried about, and a lot of it is because they're having maybe a lack of success getting the executives to do what they think they should do. Do you get involved with briefing executives?
So I do,
and what are you finding when you talk to them?
Well, you also know that, prior to this, I used to, teach innovation classes with DHS, and part of it was about developing a value proposition. And I think a lot of us have the passion around what we see as the problem, but we don't know how to put it into the context that those executives are going to really understand. And so you have to take a step back, and even though it's counterintuitive to you, say, what is the real business case that this boss cares about, that I can put my perspective on the problem that I see. And, if we just keep going, just yelling, there's going to be a fire here in the house, and don't, put it into a more cogent argument, we're going to have that. So we get to talk to a lot of executives, across various industries, but I think we're there from the national lab kind of government perspective that, in the last 15 years, they've really started to understand the level of problems, and so they're not as hesitant or resistant to listen to what we have to say. But there's still, not a lot of common answers that we can give them. So when they say, what do I do next? It's a different answer for everyone. They're looking for that perfectly cut cookie.
Yeah, and I would just say that that's typically feedback from the community anyways on what is one thing the government does well, is when they come in and brief, and it's not FUD and it's not hype, but they come in and brief and say, well, here's the business value of doing this. This is why we as the government think you should take this seriously. That is one of the most requested things. It's always funny to me, the government folks I talk to, some of them, you can't paint them all, but some of them, oh, we want to have better indicators and more insights. I'm like, no. Like, the community wants you just to come talk to their board about why this is important. And it goes over very well, especially in the utility industry. And I think most of us have lived through some jerk coming and talking to the board and getting them all riled up on the wrong thing, and it's impacted our entire year's worth of effort that we're sitting around going, maybe I should learn how to do this myself. So it's no doubt to me that Patrick's talk was definitely well received.
Well, I think one of the things he talked about was the idea, I've said this quote on stage before, so I apologize if you heard me say it, but he said that this community, if you're involved in security, you have to get used to your executives accepting much more risk than you're comfortable with. That they're just, we're security professionals, we see the bad things everywhere, and they, unless you can actually show them some hard numbers, they might say, no, okay, that's really bad, but we're willing to accept it. Which is maybe why this consequence approach is so good, because you can actually cap your risk if you can push your consequence down. But to throw it in a question, we had Aaron come up and talk about cyber insurance. So cyber insurance is going to help with risk management because you can transfer risk. Is it going to allow our networks to be less secure? Are executives going to feel like they don't have to worry as much because they've got insurance?
I think it's the other way around, and I've been saying this for years, that, and as the insurance concepts and the industries were growing, initially people were just signing up, subscribers without any adding real value. But I said that, for thousands of years, insurance companies have figured ways to make money in uninsurable areas. And so I think that that one thing, once the insurance companies see that certain types of hygiene, following certain practices will make their investment more secure, then they will require that of their subscribers. So I think a lot of the basic security things that we keep cajoling people to do, the insurance industry will really start putting the hammer down, because companies will start saving money. Oh, I get a lower premium if I do these things. That's fine now. So I think that at that level of security will be better. The question you're really asking is, are they just going to say, well, yeah, after that, the insurance company will take care of it, and I don't need to do any more? That may be a risk, but I think that once again, leadership is needed there.
Yeah, I want to come back to these things, so I'm going to remember that. Go ahead.
Shortly, I'll say, I think we're all sometimes scared about our rice bowl, and what if insurance comes in and makes my job harder? And I would agree that it's going to make it easier. I think executives aren't stupid, generally speaking. And when we look at things like risk transference, it's not replacement. They want you to have a level of security and then transfer additional risk. And in addition to lowering premiums, you walk into your chief risk officer of a major manufacturer, utility, energy company, and say, because of the things we're doing in security, the insurer is going to give us more coverage. Night and day difference in what you're going to be allowed to do in terms of your own security program.
But that's where we get to these things worry. So I'm very concerned about what the OT security part of IT is being asked to do, because it's a tremendous amount of work with very little risk reduction. And it seems to be the direction that the insurance company, if you put a gun to their head and said, you have to come up with the list of 5 things that have to be done before we can write a policy, I'm not very confident those 5 would be the right 5.
I'm confident it would suck, yeah.
So how are we gonna change that? How are we gonna morph that so that they actually do the right things in those policies?
Well, that goes back to it's going to take a long time, because the insurance industry always kind of oscillates until they find their sweet spot. I think that as they're putting more thought into how they write policies, work that Iron and others will be doing to help them, I think that's really helpful. I know Eric Byers is working in this industry as well, and so that puts some of the perspectives that we need in there. But yeah, they'll get it wrong for a bit, but they won't get it wrong for long.
I'm really worried about that, and so I think they could get it wrong for a long time, because we have a tendency of looking at security, and I'll say maybe not this audience, but companies looking at IT security practices and going, well, what doesn't break the ICS? Okay, these 3 things don't break the ICS, so move it on over, and it reduces no risk whatsoever. I mean, if you look at our regulations and standards, and if you appreciate that since 2014, our knowledge on the threats in this space has been exploding in growth in terms of what we know, we haven't changed the regulations and standards off the last 4 years of our insights. So as those folks go and echo out to insurance companies and others about you should do these things and follow the NIST cybersecurity framework and NERC CSF and whatever else without understanding what we've learned, we can be entirely misguided in our approach.
Okay, so last question will be kind of a short one. If we look at the cybersecurity framework, identify, protect, detect, respond, recover, where do we need to make the most progress out of those 5? And you can rank them 1 or 2 or 3. Now, Rob, you're going to be an honest guy. I know you're not going to say detect and respond.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
So I'll say it.
But seriously, so think about that. Where, and maybe pick the 1 or 2 that you think are the top 2 priority, and where are we doing best out of those 5? And maybe we'll.
Yeah. So me, I'm a response guy. I feel that we're all hacked, and we need to admit it. And detection internally. And once again, we talk a lot about, do you need better people or better sensors? I think we definitely need context. We need people to go in and be able to look inside our active networks now and understand what's going on in there and be able to respond. So I don't think that the opposite of fragile is anti-fragile. I think that we've been trying hardening for a long time, and I think we've kind of decided that being more resilient is the way. So there's nothing. There is a resilience framework that's kind of separate in there. So that's not part of the RMF. But we need to understand resilience and attack it in those many ways.
I think it should come to a surprise to no one that I have a strong opinion about this topic. And in my view, and I wrote a paper on it as well, if you cannot do detection, you cannot do prevention or response. And divorcing the two is ridiculous on detection and response. If you are not constantly adapting what you're preventing based on what you're detecting, it's going to immediately be out of date. And you can never get to response if you're not detecting things. So I would put detection as number 1 by a long shot, then response of even before you look at your networks. And we want you to do detection, but you better start understanding you need an incident response plan and how communications and everything else works, and then constantly feeding off those two. And then you should be removing the noise. You know what? I don't want to deal with Bitcoin every day. I don't want to deal with yet another config or breakout or WannaCry. Okay, here's what I'm detecting, what's causing impact. Let me modify my prevention and protection off of that. So I think it feeds off of that.
Daddy, stop talking.
Thank you.
So many of us have wanted to say that over the years.
Yes, I know. I've heard that a lot. Okay, well, that's a good advice, honey. Thank you. So now we're done with S4. The sessions are officially closed, but we don't like you to just wander away, kind of mope away. So we have our craft beer bash, and we have a variety of beer and root beer up here, and we have an S4 glass for you to drink it in and take home. So thank you all for coming, and please come up on stage.